The metal key feels heavy and cold against your chest, swinging from a frayed shoelace as the yellow school bus pulls away into diesel smoke. You stand on the empty gravel driveway, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the metal mailbox and a neighbor's dog barking miles away. The front door opens into a house that smells of stale morning coffee in the hollow, ringing silence of a midday afternoon. There is no greeting, no snack waiting on the counter, just the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a wood-cased kitchen clock. You drop your denim jacket on the linoleum floor and reach for the box of generic cereal, pouring it into a bowl without any milk. The television flickers to life, a static-filled portal offering only 4 channels of soap operas and game shows to fill the widening quiet. Outside, the sun begins its slow descent, but inside, you are the master of a kingdom built from shadows and the glow of the screen. You are 8 years old, and you have already learned that the most reliable person in the world is the one looking back in the mirror. This was not a tragedy or a headline. It was the standard architecture of a childhood lived in the gaps between working parents and empty streets. 7 million children walked into these quiet houses every single day, turning the deadbolt behind them with a click that signaled absolute, terrifying freedom. There was no FaceTime to bridge the distance, no GPS to track your movements, and no digital tether to pull you back to the shore. You learned to navigate the kitchen, the thermostat, and the backyard woodpile long before you learned how to navigate the complex emotions of a family. If you cut your finger or burned the toast, there was no audience for your tears, so you simply learned to stop shedding them altogether. This silence rewired your brain, creating a high-frequency awareness of every floorboard creak and every shift in the wind outside the locked window. You became an expert in the physics of your own environment, knowing exactly which door hinges squeaked and which drawers held the hidden flashlight. While the world outside debated politics and progress, you were busy calculating how long the milk would last and when the porch light needed turning. Independence wasn't a choice you made. It was a coat you were forced to wear until it eventually grew into your very own skin. You learned that the world doesn't stop to ask if you are okay, so you stopped waiting for the world to care about your struggle. This was the birth of a specific kind of armor, a psychological layering that would define every decision you would make for the next 40 years. Before you could even solve for X in a classroom, you had already solved the equation of survival in a house that felt too big. You learned quickly that if you fell from the oak tree in the backyard, no one would hear the thud or the sharp intake of breath. Gravity became your first teacher, a silent mentor that proved every choice carried a physical weight you alone were required to carry home. There were no padded corners or safety nets in this world, just the hard reality of asphalt and the cold clarity of your own survival. You became a chess player in your own life, calculating 3 moves ahead because the cost of a mistake was too high to pay twice. While other generations expected a buffer between action and outcome, you lived in a high-contingency world where the bridge burned as you crossed it. When the front door finally opened at 6 o'clock, there were no long discussions about your feelings or the nuances of your day's behavior. Discipline was a sharp, final period at the end of a sentence, a direct connection between a broken rule and a consequence that required no explanation. But as you watched from the sidelines, you noticed the adults preaching a gospel of loyalty while their own lives began to fray at the seams. You saw the flickering light of the television report on divorce rates doubling, turning the concept of a forever home into a fragile, temporary arrangement. You watched your father trade 30 years of his life for a gold watch and a pink slip, delivered by a company that forgot his name. The message was etched into your psyche with acid. The systems you were told to trust were designed to fail you when you needed them. And here is the part nobody talks about. You didn't become angry or radicalized. You simply became quiet, observant, and deeply, fundamentally untrusting. This wasn't cynicism, though the world would later call it that. It was a refined form of pattern recognition born from watching the pillars crumble. You developed a defensive pessimism, a mental simulation where you planned for the worst-case scenario because, in your experience, the worst always arrived on time. Your childhood was soundtracked by the low hum of the Cold War, with teachers explaining how a plywood desk would shield you from a thermonuclear blast. You learned to hold the ultimate contradiction, that life was precious and meaningful, yet could be erased by a single button before the lunch bell rang. To survive that kind of split reality, you weaponized irony, a sharp-edged humor that allowed you to laugh at the very things that should have terrified you. You stopped letting people see how much you cared, because in a world of falling bombs and broken promises, attachment felt like a target on your back. This emotional armor wasn't built for show. It was a bunker you constructed inside your own mind to keep the important things safe from the light. You became the generation that watches from the shadows, not because you are afraid, but because you know exactly how dangerous it is to be seen. You entered the workforce not with a manifesto or a dream of changing the world, but with the quiet, desperate hunger of a survivor. Your first paycheck wasn't a ticket to freedom. It was the first brick in a wall you were building to ensure you'd never be hungry again. You remember the paper routes at 5 in the morning, the freezing wind biting through thin gloves as you threw news onto sleeping porches. You were 12 years old, carrying the weight of a neighborhood's information, learning that if you didn't show up, the world simply went uninformed. There were no resume builders or internships. Only the raw, grease-stained reality of fast food counters and the mental math of counting back change. When the register systems failed, you didn't panic or wait for a manager. You simply used your head because that's what you'd always done. You watched your parents' generation get hollowed out by corporate mergers and interest rates, and you vowed never to give a company your heart. You gave them your competence instead, a cold and surgical efficiency that made you the last person anyone would ever dare to let go. You became the invisible engine of the modern world, the one who stays late to fix the code or the machine without asking for a thank you. There is a specific pride in being indispensable while remaining anonymous, a secret satisfaction in knowing the gears only turn because of your hand. You built the very internet the world now uses to scream for attention, yet you treat your own digital footprint like a classified document. Privacy to you isn't a setting on an app. It is a sacred boundary you earned back when mistakes didn't live forever in a searchable cloud. You remember a time when a bad haircut or a stupid comment stayed in the basement of a friend's house, not on a permanent global record. To you, the act of broadcasting your breakfast or your heartbreak feels like a betrayal of the self, a dangerous exposure of your internal bunker. You are the lurker, the observer who reads every comment but never types a word, watching the digital storm from a safe, quiet distance. This isn't because you don't understand the technology. You were the one who stayed up all night in 1994 figuring out how it worked. It's because you remember the weight of physical information, the hours spent in library stacks hunting for a single truth in a sea of paper. When knowledge costs you labor to acquire, it settles in your bones differently, becoming a part of your architecture rather than a fleeting notification. You are the one who can still fix a bike chain with greasy fingers or smack a fading screen until the picture returns to focus. You possess a mechanical intuition that the digital age forgot the belief that anything can be understood if you are patient enough to take it apart. Now, you are the one holding the flashlight for your own children, watching them move through a world that seems impossibly loud and crowded. You see them documented from their first breath, every milestone uploaded, every tantrum archived, and it makes your skin crawl with a phantom vulnerability. You have given them the presence you never had, the I love yous that were once assumed but rarely spoken in your own quiet house. You became the parent who shows up for every game and every play, overcompensating for the empty bleachers of your own 1970s childhood. But sometimes, in the middle of a crowded school event, you feel a sharp pang of worry that you've softened the very edges they need to survive. You wonder if by removing the silence, you have also removed the source of their strength, the necessity of figuring it out on their own. You see them reach for a screen the moment boredom strikes, and you remember the profound, generative power of being alone with a dusty floor. There is a paradox in your heart. You want them to be safe, but you know that your own resilience was forged in the fire of neglect. Your relationship with authority remains a quiet rebellion. You don't march in the streets, you simply stop listening to people who haven't earned it. You respect the person who knows how to fix the plumbing or lead the project, but you have zero patience for the title without the talent. You've watched too many experts fail, from the halls of Watergate to the boardrooms of 2008, to ever believe a suit makes a man wise. When the world enters a crisis, you don't look for a leader to save you, you look for your toolbox and check your supplies. Research says you are the generation least likely to seek support during stress, a statistic that feels less like a tragedy and more like a badge. To you, asking for help still feels like admitting the deadbolt failed. like letting the silence of that empty house finally win. You carry your burdens in a rucksack that you never take off, even when you are among friends, even when you are finally safe. Your loyalty is a rare and heavy thing, given only to the few who stayed through the recessions and the layoffs and the long, cold nights. You don't need 1,000 friends or 1,000,000 likes. You need the 3 people who would actually show up if the phone rang at 3 a.m. You have become the bridge between a world that communicated through handwritten letters and a world that speaks in disappearing digital bursts. You are the only ones left who speak both languages, who understand the weight of the physical and the speed of the ethereal. You are the stabilizing force in a house that is shaking, the one who knows where the main water shutoff valve is hidden in the dark. Bridges are rarely celebrated. They are simply used, walked upon, and relied on to hold the weight of 2 worlds without buckling. You are the bridge between the analog silence of the past and the digital noise of a future you helped engineer. You don't need a parade or a viral post to validate your existence, because you were raised to expect nothing and prepare for everything. There is a quiet majesty in your invisibility, a strength that comes from being the only adult in the room who doesn't need applause. You still feel that key cold against your chest sometimes, a ghost of the shoelace reminding you that you are your own primary responder. When the world feels like it is spinning out of control, you are the one who simply goes to the kitchen and starts a pot of coffee. You solve the problem before anyone else has even identified it, not for the credit, but because a leaking pipe is a personal insult to your competence. You are the last generation that truly knows how to be bored, how to sit in a room and let your thoughts wander without a digital leash. That boredom was the soil where your independence grew, the place where you learned that your own mind was the best company you'd ever have. You don't fear the dark or the silence anymore. You've lived there, you've mastered it, and you've made it your home. While the generations on either side of you battle for the narrative, you are busy making sure the foundation of the house remains solid. You are the coworker who delivers the project early, the friend who shows up with a jumper cable, the parent who listens with a closed mouth. You represent a specific, vanishing kind of grace, the ability to care deeply without the need for a public record of your kindness. If the systems fail tomorrow, you won't be the one screaming at the sky. You'll be the one figuring out how to make fire. You have spent your life waiting for the other shoe to drop, but in the process, you became the person who knows how to catch it. So, let them ignore you. Let them leave you out of the headlines and the cultural think pieces that obsess over the young and the old. Your value isn't measured in likes or legacy, but in the millions of invisible ways you hold the world together every single Tuesday. You walk back to the gravel driveway of your mind, hearing the click of the lock, but this time, you aren't afraid of the empty house. You realize the house was never empty as long as you were in it, and that the person who saved you was you all along. You turn off the porch light, close the door, and for the first time in 40 years, you finally let out a long, quiet breath.